I know.
You're gonna have a break. So
Yeah, well, it's all good. I forgot to tell you that.
did what I was told.
You ready? We're live. Regular, thank you, I was starting to read this, but welcome to our regular county council session for Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Administrative and procedural issues. 2.1, I'd ask for if there are any changes or additions to the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'd like to add, with council's permission, 3.1, and that's sale of Spring Hill Fire Department property, please.
Okay, 3.1, Spring Hill Fire Department property. Any other changes and or additions to the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, I will ask for a motion to approve the agenda, please. So moved by Councilor Joseph, seconded by Councilor Porter. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carried, thank you. Approval of minutes of the June 26, 2024 regular council meeting. A motion to approve those minutes moved by Councilor Revin, seconded by Councilor Hotelling. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carried. Aye. Thank you. Minutes of the June 19th, July 24th, August 21st, and August 28th. We've been doing a lot of special meetings. Special council meetings. A motion to approve the minutes of those 4 meetings. So moved by Councilor Gould, seconded by Councilor Hotelling. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you. Not business arising. Mr. Herrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Business arising is in council's information package at pages 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. And in the interests of not boring everyone to death, I can say that the vast majority of them are complete. There are a few that are still in progress on page 30 with respect to some land sales and closing issues. The first reading of a planning matter in Little River is still outstanding. The CGSMA dissolution, while in its final stages, is still outstanding. Sale of surplus properties in Spring Hill on Clark Street is still outstanding. Demolition order 191 McGee Street in Spring Hill is still outstanding, and Mr. Mitchell had until September 16th to complete that, and we can certainly report that that is in progress and that our staff are monitoring progress there. The building is down, and we're hoping for complete compliance soon. And the rest of these items, Mr. Chair, are complete. I'm happy to have myself or staff answer any questions you might have.
There you go. Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move right along. Item 3.1, Spring Hill Fire. Greg?
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. As this item deals with the sale of municipal property, it has been discussed by council on an in-camera basis as authorized under Section 22 of the Municipal Government Act to this point. The materials have been provided to council, and this relates to the sale of the present location of property of the Spring Hill Fire Department. Certainly we have an opportunity presented by virtue of the construction of the new fire station in Spring Hill and the site selection process for Nova Scotia Community College student housing complex, which was previously announced by the provincial government. The sale of municipal property is governed and authorized under Section 51 of the Municipal Government Act, and the council derives its authority to make these decisions under that section of the Act. As everyone knows, we're in the process of erecting a new facility to house the Spring Hill Fire Department in the industrial park in Spring Hill. The current fire department facility at 6 Main Street and associated parcel just to the rear of that parcel, which has an address on McFarland Street, will be surplus to the needs of the municipality when the new facility is ready for occupancy in 2025. As everyone knows, the current fire department is situated next door to the Nova Scotia Community College Cumberland campus in Spring Hill. And last year, the province announced that indeed they would be constructing an NSCC student housing complex in Spring Hill. Site selection, the site search for that facility has been ongoing. with all of these things in mind, the site of the fire department, the Spring Hill Fire Department, the current site, has been identified as the preferred site for the student housing complex due to its proximity to the NSCC campus. Previously talked about the authority to make this sale. In terms of determining whether the sale is happening at fair market values and associated and gathered through a previous commercial real estate appraisal for a property across the street, Main Street, has been used as a reference, and has determined that the property, the land alone, is worth $25,000. There's an agreement between the provincial government and provincial staff and our planning and administrative staff that fair market value is $25,000 for the property. So with all of those things in mind and saying all of those words, it's sort of a, won't call it a perfect storm, but it's a couple of issues that come together and allow us to make a decision that benefits both files. So the recommendation is the council declare the property, the current Spring Hill Fire Department property, surplus to the needs of the municipality, and approve the agreement of purchase and sale to the province of Nova Scotia for the purpose of establishing the NSCC student housing complex. There are 2 PIDs, as I mentioned, 6 Main Street and I believe 3 McFarland Street, directly behind the current fire department. As well, with this agreement to purchase and sale, title will transfer as soon as we close the deal, and we intend to close the deal within the next few days. That leaves us with one outstanding issue, and that is ensuring that the Spring Hill Fire Department has a location from which to operate until the new fire department in the industrial park is completed and ready for occupancy. And to that end, we are recommending that the municipality and the province enter into an occupancy agreement, which will allow the department to continue to occupy the current facility until the new one is ready, and the municipality would be covering all operating costs until we're ready to give up possession of the property. So the motion is in the package, and I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And Director Boone is here as well, and he's been involved in this issue as well. And together we can answer any questions the council has.
Thank you very much. So the recommended motion is that council declare the land currently occupied by the Spring Hill Fire Department, identified as PIDs 2523-2893 and 2523-6761, surplus to the needs of the municipality, and approve the agreement of purchase and sale with the province of Nova Scotia for these parcels for the amount of $25,000, and further that council approve an occupancy agreement with the province of Nova Scotia facilitating the use of the property until June 30th, 2025, and authorize the mayor and CAO to sign the agreements on behalf of the municipality. Yep. So moved by Mayor Scott, seconded by Councillor Joseph. And any discussion or comments on any of this?
Just
Go ahead.
quick, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quickly, I want to thank our CEO, and I want to thank Mr. Boone, Director of Planning, for the great efforts behind the scenes to bring this about. This has been in the works for a long time. I want to especially thank Minister Rushton, who has championed this cause for the last couple of years to ensure this happens, and this will be a great day for our community once this moves forward. So really, really pleased to support this, and I want to thank council for their support as well. So thank you, sir.
Okay, you're welcome. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, folks. No major organizational items or organizational policy and bylaw items. I just want to see that word bylaw. I know what's next when I turn the page. Mr. Boone, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, council, members of the public that may be viewing, staff. We have a number of planning applications on the agenda today. The first 2 are our first readings, so it'll be introduced to this council at first reading stage. Most likely these will be going on to the new council when it takes its place later in the fall. So just wanted to note first reading only at this point. So the first file behind, in front of you was in your package. It's our first reading to amend the bylaw. It's 24-14 in your package to rezone 19 McCully Lane, which is in Wards Brook. And this, the motion that was in your package is going to be slightly changed, but I'll speak to that in a moment. Wards Brook from agricultural zone to commercial recreation. Next slide, Peter, please. So the purpose of this rezoning is the owner of the property, Mr. McCully, wants to create what we call an off-grid campsite. So essentially for tenting and off-grid camping. The current zone, which is agricultural, does not permit campgrounds. So the only zone that would make this work was the commercial recreation zone. So thus the reason to go from the agricultural to the commercial recreation zone. The current use is pretty much vacant, and in this case, proposed use would be the campground as noted in the chart below. The plan is for 20 off-site campsites or off-grid campsites. Initially, 20 is what's permitted under the new zone by right. If they want to go beyond that, then they would have to do what we call a site plan agreement, which is kind of a variance from the process. Campground is to be serviced by a cluster septic system that would be designed by a QP2, which is a qualified professional. That will require approval from the Department of Environment. Campground in this new zone would be by right, as I said. Next slide, Peter, please. So this is just showing the two zones. What's a little tricky on this one, it's one PID that you can see outlined in bold there. And then we're going to, you can see it's rural residential country zone, and then we're going to the AG current zone is the agricultural zone. So the change would be the area that's not currently under the residential country zone. We're going to the commercial recreation zone. So the area in brown is the one that would section that would be rezoned in this case. So so that's kind of the difference from what was in your package. This has just made it a little clearer what exactly the applicant's applying for and what staff is aligned with. Next slide, please. Just a couple of photos. These are off street view, but good indication on the highway. So McCully Lane's a private road, of course, intersects with the main highway down through the community. You know, we would have this driveway reviewed prior to any permits being issued by Department of Transportation. But on the lower left in your screen, that is the main access into the property. This is an area that's very highly sought after as a commercial recreation area. A lot of folks travel to this area, which is why Mr. McCully's looking at advancing his project. Next slide, please. So just on the considerations here, financial implications, none specific to the proposal. There's no requirements for the municipality to invest any finance on this. Why the lot is suitable for agricultural purposes, a lot of it's actually been cleared of its topsoil, so would have been zoned agricultural based on soil conditions of the past. The owner expressed they don't intend to farm the site, and they're looking at doing the off-grid campsite to kind of enhance some of the other tourist draws that are in the area and creating that opportunity for folks that choose to utilize the off-grid type camping approach. There is a water course nearby, so they'll have to maintain the water course setback that we have in our bylaw, which is the 30.5 meters or roughly 100 feet. Proposed development will be serviced by modular washrooms, and they would be operated and connected to a sewage disposal system. All of that will be dealt with at the permit stage. Proposed development would be subject to this approval from the Department of Environment. From a community engagement point of view, it would be the same if the project advances. At a later date, council will set a public hearing in accordance with the Municipal Government Act, and notices would be placed in locally circulated paper. Now with the new change to the MGA, we obviously advertise those on our website first. And we have been posting all of our planning applications with a sign to make sure local residents are notified physically on the property and on the sites. So, Mr. Chair, I think I might have said your worship earlier, sorry. Mr. Chair, so the recommendation is on the screen. The only change that's from your package, I just, again, this is first reading, is that McCully Lane, it's a portion of that PID as per the maps I showed, versus rezoning the whole PID because the front portion will remain with the current zone. So unless there's any specific questions, we'll get in a little more detail when we get to a public hearing at a later date.
Mr. Boone, so the recommended motion is that council approve first reading of bylaw to amend the land use bylaw 24-14 to rezone a part of PID number 25181911, 19 McCully Lane, Wards Brook, from agricultural to zone, AG zone, to commercial recreational, CREC zone, and to schedule a public hearing for the proposed amendment. That is the motion. So moved by Councilor Goodwin. Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Hoteling. Any questions or comments on this for Mr. Bloom? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you very much. 5.2, first reading of the bylaw to amend LUB 24-15 to rezone PID 25150665, 11339 Highway 6 South Pugwash. Mr. Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've set this up nicely. So again, a rezoning application before us from the AG zone to rural industrial. Peter, we can go to the next slide, I guess. Thank you. So we had an application from the owner, Mr. Parker, on the site. This is actually quite close to an area we did a rezoning back in the early summer. You can recall Mr. Mundell had a propane business. It would be probably 3 lots to the left if you look at the outlined blue area. There's a number of semi-industrial construction type businesses in this neighborhood. We did talk about this as an area that we look under the plan review, considering a rezoning of a larger area for the industrial. But this is an application that the owner and the applicant has immediate needs. So the purpose would be storage, warehouse storage of overhead doors. They have a business, so it's not a retail site. It would be mainly storage for their industrial, commercial, overhead garage and door business. So in order to do that, the agricultural zone did not permit the use, so we're proposing to go from the agricultural zone to zone it to the rural industrial, which does permit and show warehousing as a permitted use. Next slide, please. So these are just a couple of other businesses that are in the neighborhood that I mentioned earlier. So there are some industrial construction type businesses and repair shops in the area. Mr. Mundell is also, as I mentioned earlier, will be developing his propane service facility. So, and we're not all that far from Crossroads manufacturing plant just down the road. Now, although they have a retail component at Crossroads with their Crossroads Cycle, this is an area that, you know, does have a number of commercial type and industrial type businesses. So just I put that in context. We'll have a few more slides when we go to the public hearing stage if council chooses to go in that direction. Next slide, please. So again, considerations under this, financial implications, none specific to the proposal. Environmental implications, staff advised the applicant to contact the Nova Scotia Department of Environment because there is some potential wetlands here that would have to be reviewed. So that would be a part of the process, and we would want some indication of any impacts or any comments or concerns the Department of Environment have prior to any public hearing. So that would be part of the process that we would have in place prior to a public hearing and any consideration. Second reading. If the proponent obviously looks to put staff washroom and use this more than just a warehouse, maybe an office component is part of accessory to his development, they would have to get an on-site sewage disposal design and system approved. The applicant from a site access point of view is been notified, and they would have to go through Nova Scotia Public Works for a commercial driveway. This area lends itself quite nicely to most access points, so don't anticipate any concerns. For community engagement, similar to all of our processes, we have to follow the Municipal Government Act. So council, if they approves, we would schedule a public hearing at a later date. Public notification will be 2 weeks prior through our municipal website. We are still putting these ads on the regional paper, Your Worship, normally a week out prior to the hearings, and we do post, as I mentioned earlier, the sites with the planning sign with information and how to contact staff. So the recommendation, Your Worships, before you, should there be any questions, be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone. We recommend the motion before council. Is the council approve first reading of bylaw to amend the land use bylaw 24-15 to rezone PID 25150665, 11339 Highway 6 South Pugwash from agricultural AG zone to rural industrial IRUR zone and schedule a public hearing for the proposed amendment. The mover for this motion, please, Councilor Hoteling. Second for the motion, Councilor Redmond. Any questions? Any comments? I'll only make one. All of what's going on in that neighborhood and the direction that you we are taking and the work that you're doing, Mr. Boone, is vital, not only to the community and the betterment of it, but also proves that we are able to pivot and do things in a very timely manner since your arrival. So I certainly appreciate all that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you very much. 5.3, second reading, bylaw to amend the municipal planning strategy 24-10 to designate commercial development districts. Mr. Boone.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Members of council, I know there's been a number of members of council that have been pushing for this, this opportunity to get within our municipal planning strategy, so I appreciate your patience on this one. This has been under consideration and development for quite some time. So the bylaw before you, Peter, we can go to the next slide, thanks. The bylaw before you is dealing with our municipal planning strategy first. As you may recall from the public hearing, this is to create the commercial development districts, so they have to be created under our municipal planning strategy. So that's why it's just a little bit different approach. We are creating policy. I'm not going to read the policy to you for word by word, but it's in the package they received that we've talked about in previous reviews of this at first reading and at the public hearing that we had in this case. The commercial development districts, we've had review done with our colleagues at Municipal Affairs. We've also had some review of this by our municipal solicitor. So our plan is to put the commercial development districts on the whole of the municipality. So Peter, we go to the next slide, you'll see that on the map. So this new schedule, which would be approved as part of the MPS and the bylaw amendment, would create commercial development districts throughout the whole of the municipality, as I mentioned. So this schedule would be form part of our municipal planning strategy through approval of this bylaw, and the policy, as was presented earlier, will be embedded into our municipal planning strategy. The creation of this tax district, as I mentioned, or development district, sorry, will allow us to be, it's the first step in implementing a commercial development support program, which will help support economic development tool. It would be utilized to do two things. One is to help new commercial development, and the second would be to help existing commercial enterprises look to expand. The differences, I think I explained in a little more detail at the public hearing, Mr. Chair, was new developments, you would look at the totality of the development, where expansions would be just looked at the change in assessment from what exists to what would be new. So that would be the key change and difference in this. This will still require us to create a more detailed bylaw in respect to how the commercial tax incentive and the bylaw itself would work. So that would be coming before the next council, Your Worship. Sorry, Mr. Chair. So next slide, Peter. I think that was the last one. So financial considerations, obviously this one will have some financial impacts. Can ease a burden for economic development for business owners for sure, and enables more commercial development and or redevelopment. The one thing that I'd like to speak to here is that even though there would be an opportunity where we may not get the full value of the assessment at the outset, this will probably stimulate businesses that would expand or build new that may not happen. So even a assessment that's, that's phased in will be better than no assessment at all on these potential developments and expansions. No specific environmental implications here. We would deal with that as every application comes through. On the program, community engagement, we did have a public hearing on this conducted back in August 21. Public hearing was duly advertised on the website, and we further advertised it in the paper. No representatives of the public spoke at the hearing. We did receive one comment from Mr. Lee Weir with Crossroads Cycle and Crossroads Housing Group, and they were obviously in support of seeing growth that or support that would improve and enhance economic growth. The one thing I would say about this is that we did have to have a public information session prior to bringing it to council, and that was also held as part of this process, because when you're doing planning MPS changes or planning strategy changes, we have to actually staff run a separate public engagement session, so that was held as well. So just want to make sure all the steps in that MPS process was was followed. So, Your Worship, Mr. Chair, recommendation is before you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone. Recommended motion is that council approve the second reading of the bylaw to amend the municipal planning strategy 24-10 for commercial development districts. Do I have a mover for that motion, please? Councilor Joseph, seconded by Councilor McCormick. All in favor of the motion? Whoops, sorry. Does anybody want to have a go with this? I got ahead of myself again a bit
I
here.
have a question.
Go
Or
ahead,
I have a
Mr.
comment.
Herrick.
Yep, thank you.
slow
So Glenn may have covered it, but I just wanted to reemphasize the fact that while this establishes the commercial development districts, it does not establish the tax phase-in mechanism. There's still another bylaw to be passed that actually authorizes and sets out the mechanism for the tax phase-in. So simply approving this bylaw does not create the tax phase-in. There's another process that has to happen yet. This lays the groundwork for it and is the
Absolutely.
base for the declaring where it can happen, but this is not the tax phase-in bylaw.
Awesome, thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing no more questions or comments, I'll call for the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried, thank you very much. 5.4, second reading, bylaw to repeal the Sunset Adult Residential Center bylaw 24-11. Mr. Herrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an issue that's been before council previously, and it relates to, and is related to the divestiture by Cumberland County of the property at Sunset Community Inc. As council will recall, at the last time we dealt with this, we dealt with the divestiture, and we also, as part of making Sunset Community Inc. a completely autonomous organization without ties to the municipality and without a requirement to appoint members or to have a municipal bylaw that covers it. Council gave first reading to a bylaw to repeal the Sunset as Adult Residential Center bylaw. This is simply second reading of that bylaw. With council's approval of this bylaw, this repeal bylaw, and with the publication of that bylaw, then Sunset will be a completely autonomous organization. This is the final piece of that. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. The recommended motion is the council approve second reading of the bylaw to repeal the Sunset Adult Residential Center bylaw 24-11. If I could have a mover for that motion, please. Moved by Councilor Redmond, seconded by Councilor O'Telling. Any questions or discussion on this? I see some happy faces. That's all I can say about that. So, and for good reason. Thank you. Ready for the question? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Number 6, business issues. 6.1, Swan Creek Protected Wilderness Area. Mr. Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to switch from planning to protected wilderness areas. So a very detailed package. I apologize for the amount of information in there, but pretty important to make sure council's well informed. This is the final designation of lands for the Swan Creek Protected Wilderness Area. Next slide, Peter, please, sorry. So this is a program that started with the municipality joining the province of Nova Scotia's contribution and work with the Canada Nature Fund project. This was originally brought forward to council in 2019, so it predated this council sitting around this table. Mr. Chair. The council in 2019 approved entering a contract with the province and working under the Nature Fund project. And the essence of that was to establish these protected wilderness areas and to utilize money through the federal and provincial contacts to gain and ascertain and acquire more land for this purpose. The contract work on this was completed in 2024. That was the end of the specific contract that had been in place since 2019. There was an acquisition of several private land parcels. I'm going to show you a map shortly here over the course of the contract. The municipality actually secured 5 parcels in the Parrsboro area of Swan Creek and 1 in the Blair Lake Nepean area under the program. The goal of the project was to contribute to a national goal of 30% of protected lands by 2030. This time, we're only talking about Swan Creek, and we'll that will be the focus, Mr. Chair. The private lands were acquired with the funds from the Nature Trust program, and the municipality's contribution to this program is through in-kind and designated lands that we would designate in this motion today, Mr. Chair, as part of the Protected Wilderness Area, the PWA. Next slide, Pete. Please. Peter, please, sorry. Too many words today. So this map, I know it's at the scale, but if you look to the very top of the map, the yellow area, I don't know that property as well, but I know that our Director of Public Works, as well as some of the folks in our community recreation group, know it. It's an area that's is well established for commercial outdoor recreation, I guess, not commercial recreation. So that upper parcel is one of the municipal parcels that would be designated. If you go to the map on the lower left, you'll see two parcels, or three parcels all together along the heavy dotted line. That is the access road. Those are the three parcels that are around the former dump site. So lands were acquired over time by the former town to create a buffer around the former town dump site landfill. The lands that aren't included in this are the actual former dump site, because it can't be designated protected wilderness area because of its previous use. That information would have been detailed a little bit more in your package. So those three parcels, plus the one at the top I mentioned, that is the municipal contribution to the protected wilderness area that allowed us to get the funding from the provincial and federal program in order to help create and support the protected wilderness areas. The next two sections of land, you can see one that almost looks like a T. That's three parcels, and then to the right, there's two other parcels. Those five were acquired by through a private landowner through the program, utilizing the funds from the Nature Trust and the program with the provincial and federal governments. So that included any soft costs for legal fees, surveys, as well as the program does require you get appraisals, so put proper land values on these lands. So all of that tied up into one package is all of the PIDs that are in the report that was put before you, Mr. Chair, and for the members of council in the package. So, next slide, please. So, recommendations before you, it does involve all of those PIDs, just to reinforce this is a combination of the lands that were acquired utilizing the funds from the program, as well as the municipal lands that are part of the contribution. These lands have been vetted with staff and senior management. This is an opportunity for us to help expand the protected wilderness areas. In your package, it's very clear that we retain title to these lands. So these lands remain in the title of the municipality. The agreement that would be signed with the municipality, which the CAO would have authority to do after this motion, does allow us, if there's a need to make changes in the future, there's some flexibility. We, for some reason, need these lands for other purposes in the future. So it is part of that commitment to the protected wilderness area, but there is some flexibility. There's two small areas on the map that I didn't point out that will not be part of the protected wilderness area, because there's one is a snowmobile trail that wasn't identified by the local snowmobile associations, but was identified by the provincial associations. So you can see at the bottom of the T, I went through the previous land was with the private landholder. So that trail will not be part of the designated area, so that will allow snowmobiles to still travel across it, because protected wilderness areas do not permit motorized vehicles. And the roadway at the top of that designated area is also from the previous private lands. There's an access road that is utilized. So again, folks still need to utilize that access road. So only two kind of anomalies I wanted to point out. So again, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions, happy to answer them. It's a big package. I understand that. I know that this has been a long time coming in this process, and happy to have it at this point and juncture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone. The recommended motion is that council approve the designation of the lands as listed per the PIDs below to form part of the Swan Creek Protected Wilderness Area, and authorize the CAO to finalize the lands for designation with the province, and to sign the final letter of designation and return same to the Minister of Environment. The PIDs are listed as follows: 2524-8873, 2520-0247, 2520-3902, 2520-0684, 2520-0700, 2508-3908, 2520-3928, 2520-3910, and 2520-0890. Any comments or questions? Counselor Hoteling, while I catch my breath.
I was just making the motion.
Thank you. Second for the motion, Counselor Goodwin. Okay, any comments or questions? From anybody? No?
Chair?
Oh, is Murray's trying, there he is. Is she not little
You-
whisperer?
Mr.
Go
Chair,
ahead,
I just-
go ahead.
Thank you. So my question, I just written the question down for Glenn, but I think he's answered anyway. And I was going to ask if consultation had been held with the local off-highway vehicle or SANS organizations, but it sounds like it's not going to prohibit any trail use that we have in place now, both now and in the future. But is that correct, Mr. Boone? That there will be no prohibition of any trail use currently in place now for those organized organizations. Sorry, thanks.
Mr. Chair, back to His Worship via Zoom. The two areas I said that wouldn't be part of the designation was to permit the continued use for snowmobiling as well as off-road vehicles. The majority of the area is just impacted by those two trails. Most of the area has been looked at for regular use. Some older wood roads, you can see they're not utilized, haven't been utilized for quite some time, and as well as most of what happens in those areas seems to be folks taking advantage of the lands, or will take advantage of the lands through hiking and snowshoeing and whatnot. So, except for those two areas that we've had identified for use by trails that are not part of the protected wilderness area, that would be correct. So, it's impossible to know that there might be somewhere in this massive acres of land that someone does cross it on occasion. We're not going to be able to completely police that. So, but at the end of the day, what has been reserved out respected those two trail allocations. So, thank you.
Yeah, great, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I guess so. Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Could I have a motion to recess, please? And before we make the motion, I'll explain that we have a couple of public hearings scheduled as part of this meeting for 4 p.m. today.
Do we have any councilor recognition items?
Do you want to switch to those?
Well, we're going to do that.
Okay, I got the line drawn in the wrong spot. Is that what you're telling me?
I think so.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, so we'll back up just for a second on the motion to recess and do 7.1, councilor recognitions. And Dale, I think, did you have one? According to Greg, it's not listed in my thing here, so go ahead.
Okay. On April 28th of this spring, a grade 12 student at the time, Caden Allen, and some friends were heading out to do some trail riding on their ATVs. And when they went across the river at low tide, across the bridge, at low tide, they noticed something in the water moving around, and a little bit of water moving around, and they went over, parked close to the river, and I'm going to say he was brave enough to wade down into the muddy river and went out and rescued about a 4-foot porpoise that was stranded there and got him back out to deep water so he could swim away. And just recognize Caden for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else on the council recognition? Hearing no more. I'll now ask for a motion to recess and go back to the public hearings that are scheduled for 4 o'clock, which, Councilor Joseph, you're making a motion. I'm explaining why we're making it first. 1 second. Okay. So, motion is because of the public hearings that are scheduled at 4 o'clock, so we have to stop the meeting, and we will restart the meeting at 4 o'clock at the start of the public hearings. Motion by Councilor Joseph that we're in recess, and I will now say we are in recess. Thank you, everyone. I'm not voting on that, right? I'll now call the meeting back to order from our recess earlier this afternoon. The first item on the agenda for this afternoon is item 8.1, which is a public hearing, and it's a bylaw to amend the LUB 24-12 and Shaw Rural Housing Development Agreement to rezone multiple PIDs within the bounds of Mechanic, Elm, and Crossan Street in Spring Hill. Information on this item is included in your meeting package. I'd like to advise the public that this public hearing is being held according to the provisions of the Municipal Government Act, and that the purpose of the public hearing is to provide the public with the opportunity to express their views on certain proposals prior to council making a final decision. So just to be clear, no decision will be made today, public input and discussion, okay? I now call the public hearing to order, and ask that Director Boone do the staff presentation on the proposed bylaw amendments. Mr. Boone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council, staff, and members of the public. Just going to get our presentation up there, and we've had a lot of presentations there, Your Worship, today, so, or sorry, Mr. Chair. So we just want to make sure we're ready to go. One back from that one, Peter. Yeah, there we go. All right, thank you. Thank you to Peter for organizing that. Mr. Chair, this is an application that has been in front of council at first reading, today being the public hearing, as laid out in the Municipal Government Act. This is probably a project, although the official application's been in with the municipality for the last number of weeks over the summer. This is a project we've been talking with Shaw Rural Development, both myself and the CAO, about interest in creating developments within the community of Spring Hill for quite some time. So a lot more has gone into this conversation and getting to these documents today than just simply the application that was recently put before council. I just think it's important to stress that because it is a big development, and there has been a lot of time and negotiations, discussion with Shaw Rural Housing on this project. Your Worship, you've already kind of set this up nicely. The bylaw has got two components to it. One is to rezone a number of PIDs, and the second is to create an actual housing development agreement, because when you exceed 16 units, housing units on one project, it requires us to go through a formal development agreement. Next slide, Peter, please. So the plans for the development, it's a combination of several properties. The first is, as council is aware, is a property that we had surplused for municipal needs back last fall, and we did an open RFP, which we received just the one bid from Shaw Rural Developments. So that project, or that parcel, would be, if you're looking on the screen, would be the larger section to the left of the concept plan. That area was an area in which that we proactively rezoned it as we were getting it out to the RFP process, because we felt the highest and best use for it was multi-residential utilization. The access points to this development will come from both, both Mechanic and Crossan Street. So there's two key points of access for vehicle traffic. There will also be several pedestrian connections to this development. The one key one would go to Mechanic Street along the walkways, the expanded shoulder of the driveway accesses. And Mechanic is a great access point for two reasons. It's a well-maintained road, but it also has great accessibility to our play park, which includes a splash pad, and will be easy walking for students to the new elementary school. The second component of this we talked about is some dedicated green space in the middle of the development. So you can see there's kind of a gap in the middle section, highlighting a little bit darker green. That's an area that the developer has dedicated for internal green space for tenants that will be living in the various unit accommodations. It is a rezoning. The portion that's being rezoned to multi-res are the PIDs that are not currently multi-residential. I think I had explained that in the first reading report. So the larger parcel that the municipality has now sold and closed on a sale to Shaw Rural is already multi-residential, and the other parcels that are in the list of the PIDs, Your Worship, you'll reread in the motion later, have been put in place in respect to changing them from the R low zone to the R multi-zone. Next slide, Peter, please. So I won't go through all of the schedule here and the phasing, but it's important to note that when Shaw is given approval, if that's the wishes of council, they will do this development over phases. So it would be 4 phases. The first phase would start at Crossan Street and then move throughout the development. There would be some consolidations of parcels as we go with subdivision. There's an area of this land that is actually still owned by the Nova Scotia Housing, provincial government through Nova Scotia Housing. They have a multiple number of PIDs. That's why the list in your project, or in your package is so long with PIDs. These are PIDs that were created back in the 70s and 80s without a full subdivision plan being registered. So they show up on the maps, but there is no roads, there's no services to those PIDs. But the majority of those would be in phase 1 and a little bit of the phase 3 area. So phase 1 of construction, as I mentioned, is in the yellow. We'll register an easement through the development for any of the services that are required or municipally owned. Then the other phases of construction will take place over time. Next slide, Peter, please. So this is a concept rendering. We just recently received this, so it wouldn't have been in your package. This is showing kind of a concept looking down one of the main access roads. As you know, in the package, we are looking at this being graveled hard surface within the development with some areas of pavement that would lead off Crossan and Mechanic Street. But so it obviously gives you a good flavor of the development with some green space near all of the units, as well as in the landscape component of the plan would be a planting of quite a number of new trees as part of the overall development. I'm not going to steal all of the concept plans that were shared. I know that the representative from Shaw Rural will have a few more concepts to share with you as part of their presentation. Next slide, please. So this is just, we had a number of concepts of the floor plans in your package. I just left one in just to give you an idea that we're looking at multi-unit developments here. Some of the units are a little smaller than others, but it allows for that angle of affordability within the development. There's quite a few more of these in your package, but I didn't want to take too much space in the presentation on these. But again, your package has a little bit more information on the number of units that are looked at. We have 2-unit buildings, 3-unit buildings, and 4-unit buildings within the development. Next slide, Peter, please. So requirements of the development agreement. Property owners will be required to obtain permits for each phase. Property owner and the developer will work with Municipal Public Works, coordinate servicing connections and all those levels of service needed. Our director, Mr. Walkrest with Public Works, as well as his staff, have been in a number of conversations with Shaw's engineering team to make sure that this all makes sense before we went forward at this point, Your Worship, to the public hearing. They'll continue to work on all services, but also working on adequate stormwater management plan and measures for the development. As I mentioned in the concept drawings you saw, there's a requirement for pedestrian pathways along the interior laneways, so the main connection would come off Mechanic with a widened road surface for connection for pedestrians to Mechanic. And as you can see in the concept plan, we have a requirement, and the folks at Shaw Rural have been cooperative in creating a connection to Robertson Avenue along the existing right-of-way that the municipality owns there. The reason we looked at Robertson is obviously if folks are going to the community college, to the grocery store, to the pharmacy or Tim Hortons, they're not going to walk up to Mechanic and cross and to make a turn down Mechanic or Elm to get back downtown. So we thought it was most convenient for the residents in this development to have a connection down to Robertson Avenue. Next slide, Peter, please. The original package that was given to you, the development agreement was attached to it. We have a revised development agreement that is in your package now. Simply since the first reading, all we did was clarified some key components. I thought it was important to note those in this conversation today. But we had a schedule in your new package that kind of highlighted the changes. I won't go through them all, Your Worship, but I want to just highlight a few. The concepts that you see are concepts a little hard to, to be exact with those in a development agreement, but Shaw Rural has ownership and connection with Prestige Homes, build quality manufactured homes, so we know that the concepts are very close to what you'll see in the development. But this was just to clarify they're similar to those concepts, because as they go, some of the development, you may see some slight changes to architecture and design. The one key thing is these are all one-level buildings, so that wouldn't change, but the concept of, maybe some additional changes to the siding or the coloration may change. So we wanted to specify that. The landscaping buffer is an important part. So in the discussions and the negotiations with the developer, we ensured that there was an offset from all the existing residential properties that are there. We were just clarifying what they can do with those areas as the construction is complete, is just allowing hydro seeding in some areas to be a permitted use for creating ground cover. Pretty common in developments throughout the province to use hydro seeding to create those grass or those ground covers. Parking and access. This is a development I think will have a balance of folks that don't have vehicles and that do have vehicles. So because the land use bylaw can change with requirements for parking, we decided to specify in the agreement that it's one space per dwelling. The developer is actually providing more than that in the agreement. We just wanted to make sure if our requirements for parking could become more restrictive in the future, that they wouldn't be offside within the development agreement as they get to later phases. So again, clarity really. Next slide, Peter, please. These are all changes, but they're all related. It basically says when we will have a service agreement that will be negotiated with our Director of Public Works. Just clarifying for all of those services, including stormwater management, that that agreement would be in place prior to issuance of occupancy permits. Gives us time to make sure as we're building certain phases that there could be adjustments to those service agreements that are required from a technical perspective. All of that is subject to approval, excuse me, Your Worship, subject to approval with our internal engineering staff. So all of those changes are just kind of looping into that one comment. Next slide, please. Construction phasing, again, just for clarity, these things were changed from the first copy of the agreement you saw. Just for clarity, there's a lot of these PIDs, as I mentioned, that exist under the public Nova Scotia housing lots, that over time, some of them will be brought into one phase, so consolidation of plans. We're just creating the flexibility, submitting plans of consolidation at different stages. So it's really just clarity of when those subdivision plans will occur. Again, just to offset these kind of unique opportunity for the development, but also it's unique that we have those extra PIDs that were created many years ago through the process of land registry mapping. It probably would be noted back at that time the province wouldn't have required subdivision approval, so therefore, Mr. Chair, it wouldn't have been something that would have been noted at the time. So we kind of have PIDs that are floating in the field there with no services and no roads. This is just allowing us to clearly define that in the development agreement and when subdivisions would occur. Next slide, please. So considerations, financial, none specific to the proposal. The developer is responsible for construction of all services and internal networks. There will be connections to our municipal services, obviously at the street lines. Environmental, there's nothing specific to this. It's all going to be serviced with municipal sewer and water. And as I mentioned, the internal network will be the responsibility of Shaw Rural. And all of that will be done through connections and detailed engineering designs with our public works staff. From a community engagement perspective, this hearing today, Mr. Chair, was duly advertised as per the Municipal Government Act. We did it on our municipal website. We did put further advertisements in the locally circulated regional paper, and 2 different planning notices were posted on the site, and we utilized the access point off Crossan Street, so to make sure folks in that neighborhood were aware, and we utilized the area off Mechanic Street. We actually put it on the larger lot that where we just recently had that house removed at 87. We put it there because I thought it was best for exposure for all of the neighborhood to see. At this point, Mr. Chair, there's no motions to consider. It's a public hearing stage, and I know council will give consideration to second reading potentially later or at a future date. So happy to answer any questions. Stephanie Ma with Shaw Rural Housing, she's their Director of Planning. She is here to make a presentation as well, but I'd be happy to answer any questions first.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. Were there any written submissions received in regards to this project?
We have had only one written submission. It came earlier today. It was a letter from the principal of Nova Scotia Community College, Mr. McCormick, basically supporting the development because they see the need for housing, not just for students, but for all. And any increase in housing stock and inventory in the town, they say is beneficial, not just to the community, but also for their potential growth at the community college. I have received no other written comments, and we have received no phone calls.
And you say the proponent is here and wishes to speak?
Yes,
Okay,
Mr. Chair.
certainly. Ask them to come forward. And Before we start, I will ask you to, A, state your name, and B, will remind you that you're limited to 5 minutes, and that you're only permitted to speak once. And any questions or clarification that or can only come from myself. So,
My name is Stephanie Matrache. I am the Director of Design and Sustainability with Clayton Developments. I have a PowerPoint presentation, if that is able to be brought up on the screen.
we're hoping.
Peter, do I have it on a stick? Will that work? Yeah. Sorry about that, Mr. Chair.
Money is cold, money must be cold.
Almost there, Mr. Chair.
No worries, I'm not counting it in the 5 minutes. We're good.
Thank you.
This looks better.
All right, thank you for your patience.
First of all, thank you for having me here today. Normally, it's our company policy to come to first readings as well, but we sort of pressed go on this project while I was in the air on an airplane. So my apologies for not being here sooner. It's great to meet you all here. Next slide, please. I just wanted to share a little bit about our company. Shaw Rural Housing is a bit of a new endeavor and a new division as part of a broader company called the Shaw Group. We have 10 divisions, 2 of which would be Clayton Developments, who I technically work for, and Prestige Homes, which Glenn has mentioned in the past. And it's sort of a partnership between these 2 divisions of the Shaw Group that has born this new division called Shaw Rural Housing, which we're just beginning to explore. And it differs from Clayton only slightly in that we are looking to move product on the lower end of the cost spectrum and target the average income in smaller towns and rural areas of Nova Scotia, as opposed to Clayton often does larger scale projects within and around HRM, as well as other regional municipalities in the province. Next slide, please. So through Shaw Rural Housing, we're looking to reduce the cost of our units compared to the stick-build homes we might do through Clayton Developments through a couple of different approaches, one of which is modular development with our Prestige Home branch, smaller footprint, small unit sizes, and standardizing construction where we do stick-built homes as opposed to the modular style of development. And then on a project-by-project basis, we focus a lot on reducing the cost of infrastructure development as much as we can. Next slide, please. Glenn did a fantastic job of sharing a lot of details of the site plan, so I don't need to get into too much detail, but just to speak to a couple of the different elements that we've designed here. We do have this 6-meter buffer around the entire perimeter of the project. That's set back from buildings 100% of the time. And then there are just a couple incidences where we have driveway accesses entering into this buffer area. But other than that, we are striving to maintain existing vegetation as much as possible. The only constraints on that would be the construction pad as it extends outside the perimeter of the modular units when we place them, and the drainage swale that we require for stormwater management purposes. So it should leave approximately 2 to 3 meters buffer of existing vegetation, and any disturbed area would be grassed and turned green. The only other exception you'll see at the far right-hand side of the screen, there's the dark blue circle, and that's sort of highlighting an area where we've identified some existing encroachments from the existing home. And that would be a situation where we might have a structure in the buffered area, but we plan to work with that homeowner to not have to move their garage or anything like that. Our approach is typically that we'll move sheds that are not on foundations, and then we try and keep anything that's structural in place when we deal with encroachments. We have, excuse me, we have, as Glenn mentioned, worked with the municipality to satisfy the requirements to make this a walkable community. We've widened out the accesses where we see the most traffic conflicts, so where we think we would see convergences of several cars at a time and possibly pedestrians at the same time, which would be around the central area of the site up to the green space. The vehicle access points were selected very specifically for our needs to develop with the modular units. We need a very large turning radiuses for trucks to access the site. So if we were to come in off Robertson Avenue or create an access off Elm Street, the truck wouldn't have been able to get in. So it worked out really well that we were able to acquire these particular parcels through the province as well as through a private owner off of Mechanic Street. One particular additional topic of discussion that Glenn brought me up to speed on was the question of why are we doing gravel instead of asphalt? And I wanted to address that and sort of let you know the cost that's associated with that. So it varies depending on our contractors that we're able to use, but the range would be to update this from gravel to asphalt would be between $300,000 and $500,000, which translates roughly to $5,000 per unit. And what we really want to do through this project is make the base model of the development available to the ownership would be that we would sell. The project ownership model would be that we would sell this project to likely a nonprofit who would then operate this as a rental project. And we want to make the base model available to them. And then at any future time, anyone is able to invest that cost to upgrade to asphalt in the future. But this just makes sure that the front end of the project is a lower cost opportunity for the nonprofit who would likely be the purchaser. Next slide. This is the rendering that Glenn would have shown. This is from Crossan Street looking north up the project, and it just shows that it's a fairly efficient layout, but there is still a decent amount of green space and opportunity for gardens and parking between all of the units. If you see on the right-hand side, that's one of our fourplex units that the layout isn't included in the development agreement, but it is intended to be developed on the site plan, where you've got a sort of a double wide building compared to the 16-foot wide modules that you would typically see throughout the rest of the development. And that's just to demonstrate that we are building homes that don't necessarily all look like a mini home. So you're not necessarily going to go through the site and think like this looks like a mini home park. We do have some variable unit styles in there. Next slide. this angle is just from the center of the development at the intersection that goes out to Mechanic Street. These are all single level, as Glenn mentioned, which prevents them from being too obtrusive to the existing community. Next slide. And this is a picture of some of what the pocket sort of format will look like, which is towards the north of the site. And we've seen some social benefits of these style developments where the units are sort of facing inward and it creates a bit more of a social environment. These would also be where we'd be seeing more of the 3 and 4 unit buildings because there's more opportunity to provide parking in these spaces. And the reason we put these to the north of the development on the municipalities, prior municipal lands, is because just the site dimensions lended themselves better to this format of development. Next slide, please. And these are just some actual pictures of homes that we've built recently. In the bottom left corner, this one was built in New Glasgow for a nonprofit, and that would be very similar to what the triplexes would look like in this project. And in the upper right corner, that is a single 575 square foot unit, 16 by 36 feet, and that is incorporated into the pocket designs that are up in the north of the project. That concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Before we move a little further along, is there anyone else from the public here that would like to speak today? Seeing none, I would ask the applicant if they have any additional comments to make at this time.
No additional comments at this time.
Very good, thank you very much. So we can now close the public hearing, right?
Ask questions of council.
Oh, sorry. And any additional questions from councils? Oh, Councilor McCormick, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're saying that the cost efficiency for paving was too high. I was wondering if any other alternatives, example, chip sealing, sand sealing, were viable options for cost efficiency. And also will regular maintenance be performed several times annually, and will like magnesium chloride treatment be applied during the summers to control the dust? And will the road be prepared for potential future paving, which includes things like ditch construction and compaction testing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, some of the components that you've mentioned would be in the purview of the nonprofit in terms of maintenance, but we would expect that the nonprofit would be maintaining the gravel regularly. We might write that into our purchase and sales agreement, for example. The gravel that we lay down can easily be proceeded to an asphalt surface, and we are actually in conversations with our potential purchaser who we're discussing. It's still an opportunity that if the purchaser would like asphalt, we are absolutely happy to comply. It's just that cost gets passed along to them, and they have to determine whether they want to take that on, or the municipality would have to determine if that's something that they want to enforce. But it does translate down to increased unit or rental costs.
You said it was, sorry, $5,000 per unit by putting the asphalt down now?
Roughly.
Roughly?
It's more accurate to say it would be between $300,000 and $500,000 for the entire project, since the per unit count is maximum of 107 through the development agreement, but we haven't determined whether we're going to have like all 3 plexes, so it could be a little less than that, depending on how many 3-plexes or 4-plexes that the nonprofit would like to see.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Stephanie, thanks. That's a great presentation. Just a couple questions from me through the chair. The roads that we looked at going through the development, are they going to be wide enough for two-way traffic plus pedestrian traffic?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the traffic it's 6.1 meters wide throughout, except where it's 1.4 meters wider than that, so 7.5 meters as you enter from Mechanic Street and then proceed up to that green space. So the other areas are 6.1, which is technically one-way or traffic each direction without additional widening for pedestrians. The reason we didn't widen out further in those areas is because we anticipated the busiest area of traffic to be in the middle. So we didn't see it as likely that there would be two-way traffic and a pedestrian at the same time at the north end of the project or out towards Crossan, just because most of the pedestrians would be going out to the north to access the center of the town, and then out the bottom, you wouldn't see as much pedestrian traffic. That was our thinking when we designed it that way.
I got a couple more questions, Mr. Chair. Or actually, one more. So I just want to confirm from, say, Crossan all the way straight through to Robertson. I understand the road ends for the development in a certain area, but will there be a dedicated walkway from the edge of that development through to Robertson Avenue?
As it's designed right now, there is not a dedicated walkway the entire length.
Okay, and then the reason why is, Mr. Chair, is, like I said, there's not going to be a whole lot of people that everyone's going to have cars. Or they may just want to take a walk downtown to save on the high price of fuel, because everybody likes to get out, go for a walk, and that's the main concern. Because if they have to go down to Crossan or up Mechanic, because there is no throughway down Elm Street, that's a longer walk and trek. It's great walking down there, but they got to carry a lot of stuff back. That's my only concern, Mr. Chair.
I can jump into
Would you like to?
Yeah, I guess in fairness, and I appreciate the input, Councillor Joseph, because I think that's the part of the beauty of public hearings and the conversation. In the conversations with Shaw Rural, with Stephanie and the rest of their team, we try to focus on the main points. So we did require in the development agreement that connection to Robertson be created. So they're actually going to be developing that as part of the project, which is really not on the Shaw land, it's on our municipal lands. So creating that connection from what we're calling the north, or the denser pocket of the development, creating that connection down to Robertson, we thought was pretty key for the reasons you just said. Most folks are going to flow that way because you're not going to walk up the Mechanic or Crossan to get downtown, where all the services are, where the community college is. So we ensured that connection from the central green space, from the big pocket, from the green space out to Mechanic, has the widened edge, and that was all done in the conversations, because we figured a lot more folks will go that way because the park's there, as I mentioned earlier, and the access to the new elementary school. To me, the kind of key area for that access is that bigger pocket at the end. And if you look at the site plan development, all of those pockets Stephanie referred to are kind of in those little social nodes. They are all connected by pedestrian walkways that will get you to Robertson. So I think we've kind of pushed to make sure that happened on that, because that Robertson will all be new development, but all that new development on that end will be connected to Robertson, which I think is going to be, in my view, to all the members of council, will be the heaviest pedestrian connection, and that's why we kind of push to have that as part of the development, and not a cost that would be directly on the municipality. It's a cost that we're asking the developer to do. It's not unusual to have offsite costs to a developer within a project, but that was one that we thought was pretty important to make that connection. So looked at a little bit of a give and take on the other internal pedestrian connections. So all connected from that node, from the green space to Mechanic, and everything connected to Robertson, if that makes sense.
More. Thank you, Chair. I looked at development. I was kind of focused on and intrigued about the units and stuff. Will there be any poles with lights, pole lighting throughout the roads?
That,
Chair.
through you, Mr. Chair. We will have site lighting, definitely. I don't think the site lighting has been designed internally yet, so I can't tell you exactly what it will look like. I imagine it will be poles based on my experience with our similar developments. I do believe we'd be having Nova Scotia Power poles through there, but I am not 100% sure, so I'd have to follow up with you just to circle up with our engineers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Steph.
Mayor Scott?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you, first of all, I want to thank our presenter and Shaw for their interest and their confidence in our community. You know, across this province, affordable housing particularly is really in need, and it's certainly relevant here in Cumberland County. So we appreciate your confidence in our community. Stephanie, would you explain, through you, Mr. Chair, if the presenter could explain, Stephanie mentioned that their intent here is, their business plan is that, like in Pictou, that a nonprofit would actually purchase the property and operate it as a going concern, I guess. Could you explain how that would unfold? So does that mean you have to find that you have to make that agreement with someone prior to construction, or will you construct this project on your own and then hopefully find a nonprofit to purchase and operate it? Could you just explain the process, please? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have been in talks with a particular nonprofit for quite a few months, keeping them up to speed on the process with this development. And our development of the project is somewhat contingent on their signing of a purchase and sales agreement with us, due partially to the fact that we are commencing phase 1 through the provincial lands. And the agreement that we have with the province is that it will go to a nonprofit. It's part of what they've required of us. So for that reason, it is somewhat necessary, but it's looking very promising. We've had meetings just in the past day where everyone seems to be on board. So I can never speak for another party, of course, but I would say that it's looking very promising.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenter.
I'll now declare the public hearing closed. Thank you very much, everyone. Next on the agenda, item 8.2, public hearing, bylaw to amend the land use bylaw 24-13 to rezone a portion of PIDs 2507, 2455, and 2535-9803, Burns Drive, Upper Napan. Mr. Boone is going to present this as soon as I get to the page where we can do it all. What page are we on here?
127.
127, thank you very much. Okay, so, same as the last time, I'd like to advise everyone that the public hearing is being held in accordance to the provisions of the Municipal Government Act, and the purpose of this public hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to express their views on certain proposals prior to council making a final decision. I will now call the public hearing to order and ask for staff to provide a presentation on the proposed bylaw or amendment. Mr. Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're just getting set up there. Next one. Yeah, that you're there, Peter. Awesome. Thanks everyone for the patience. As you know, we had a lot of files on the docket earlier and this afternoon as well. So it jumped to the first reading there. That one. It was good and then it wasn't. I think just open the other one. Your Worship, I'll set this up as we're just getting the PowerPoint together. Again, similar to the proposal we just discussed for Shaw, this is a public hearing. This is an application that we've been in conversations with the developers looking at making the purchase and creating the new project, which is a collaborative medical clinic. Mr. Parsons with Parsons Developments is here today. Will speak to any questions, not a formal presentation, but is here to answer any questions that council or may be posed by the public. The application that came forward is based on a couple of things. So first of all, the existing lands that we're looking at changing the zoning to, they are currently under our municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw zoned highway commercial. So changing these to a general commercial zone in some ways is actually a down zoning because you can have some more intensive uses in the highway commercial zone versus the general commercial zone, which is what exists. For clarity, we've also asked to change and add some text to that zone to permit medical offices as a permitted use within the general commercial zone. It's probably one of those things that when we did the original plan probably should have been more clarified, so we're just doing that as part of this application as well. Next slide, Peter, please, thanks. So put this in some context. Air photo to the left side obviously shows the existing Cumberland Regional Health Center. Burns Drive is an existing DOT maintained public road. Burns Drive goes in and ends at a cul-de-sac turnaround. There is a number of residential properties at the entrance to Burns Drive. But as I mentioned, all of the lands that are in past those residentially zoned and occupied parcels are currently zoned highway commercial. So a little bit more intensive commercial zone than the general commercial. The application is looking at changing it from the highway commercial to the general commercial to permit the primary health care clinic or collaborative clinic. We're not looking at rezoning all of the lands that are owned by the current ownership group. We do have a letter on file from the ownership group permitting Parsons Investments to make this application, so we do require that when the land is not yet transferred. So this overall air photo gives you the overview, and to the right you'll see how the current zoning is in place, plus the area we're looking at zoning to the general commercial zone. We'll mention there's two separate PIDs here. There's a larger, which is a portion of the PID that ends 2455, so the larger lot that leads out to the end of the cul-de-sac. And there's a smaller lot that was probably originally part of the subdivision plan that created lots off Burns Drive, but that under the initial plan back in 2018 was also zoned highway commercial. Next slide, Peter, please. So some concept elevations to share. We normally do this with rezonings when the proponent has enough information and they've advanced the project enough. This is a concept that I believe is being considered in a number of other communities throughout the province in the same design. I think the design itself is not part of what the rezoning is required to approve, but I think it's important for folks to see what is the concept. So kind of low level specialized architecture. The design is a little bit more unique in order to bring a lot of natural lighting into the folks that would either work there or be attending the medical center for services. Floor plan shows it's a collaborative practice, so there's a number of offices throughout with varied services. Next slide, please. So site plan, you can see in the upper right, you can see the location. It's, like I said, a unique design building. Although we are rezoning or downzoning a portion of the bigger PID and the other PID that stands freestanding, that is immediately adjacent to one of the residential properties, that is not an area in which the building itself would be located. That would be creating a bit of a buffer from the medical center, medical collaborative practice to that residential lot. Next slide, please. So when you drive on Burns Drive, it seems like a very rural road. It's it's gravel surface, but when you drive on it, you will note that it was built to DOT standards, quite wide. Ditching on both sides for stormwater. The power and also the communication lines are in just short of the end of the cul-de-sac. So power and communication services are already into this particular lot where the development would happen. But you can see DOT does maintain it fairly well, and it was built to their standard at the time. Next slide, please. So the draft text amendment, I'm not going to go through all the uses. The one key here is that we're going to add in a section that will specifically note that medical offices within the general commercial zone would be permitted. This will actually help us in all of our general commercial zones going forward. So not just specifically this site, but all general commercial zones within the municipality. Next slide, please, Peter. So financial implications, none specific to the proposal, Mr. Chair, and to the members of council. Environmental on-site sewage disposal system will be required and approval from the Department of Environment to meet that eligibility. The applicant is working with Amherst Water Utility to extend Central Water to the facility. Central Water does have a access and shut-off point at the intersection of McDonald Road and Burns Drive. From a public engagement component, Your Worship, Mr. Chair, this public hearing was duly advertised as required under the Municipal Government Act. We are only required to do that through the website. We did additionally put it into the local published regional paper, The Casket, which also has an electronic version online. And we put a planning notice in front of the property, tried to orient it so it would face those that would travel in and out of the road on a regular basis, so faced it down towards the residential properties. Putting the posting on the property is not a required part of our process, but it's something we do just to put more exposure to the fact there's an application happening on any particular property. I did receive comments from one of the local residents, an owner that's adjacent to the development. I did have a chance to speak with them as well as some email. The concerns that they brought forward are pretty typical and are valid concerns when you see these kind of developments. Maintaining a buffer from the commercial lands to the residential, I've kind of spoke to that. Potential traffic increases on Burns Drive because right now, beyond those residential properties, there's not a lot of activity. Department of Transportation are working with the developer on that, and again, they say that the road has been built to their standards, so they don't anticipate any issues, but they would have to issue a permit at construction for a commercial driveway off that road. And as well, vehicles that are in a little bit more delivery, garbage trucks and delivery trucks, those things were noted to the owners, the residential owners that I spoke with. So again, all valid concerns when you're considering such a development. As I mentioned earlier, the zoning from commercial highway to general commercial is a bit of a down zoning. It's still commercial, don't get me wrong, but it will restrict the type of developments that could happen on the portion that we do rezone. Mr. Chair, no motions to consider at this point. It's a public hearing. Mr. Parsons is here. He's willing to answer any questions. He doesn't have a formal presentation, but felt that the project's important enough for him to be here and answer any questions that council may have or that the public may have.
Perfect.
And we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone. The next thing on the list says, were there any written submissions from any members of the public? So you've already covered that, I believe.
Yeah, I thought it was important to do that. We did have one other inquiry by phone today, Your Worship, but just asking for the timing of the meeting today. So I think our deputy clerk was going to make contact or attempt to make contact with the individual, make sure. But as I said, we have advertised it best we could. We actually re-advertised on our social media as we're leading into public hearings. Mr. Cole did that again last night, so we have promote. When we're having public hearings, we try to get that on our social media as well. So that was done again last night to remind folks of the public hearing today. For both public hearings, I should mention.
Yep. Awesome. So is there any members of the public here that wish to speak to this hearing today? Come forward, sir. Yeah, I will. Okay, first things first, you have to identify yourself. Second thing, I will caution you, as in the previous one, you have 5 minutes to speak, and you will not be allowed to re-speak after the proponent, for example, would clarify any topics that you might bring up. Fair enough? Okay, go ahead.
Hello, my name's Ken Harnish. I am the property owner adjacent to the new proposed collaborative care practice. As me and Glenn have talked back and forth about some specific concerns, one of my concerns was just of public safety due to me and my spouse for virtue of employment, just where I know they serve methadone there and things like that. Not that I think that it's going to necessarily bring a criminal element to it, because generally you're just trying to help people. At the same time, by virtue of employment, it does cause a security concern or public safety concern for me. I haven't had any, I've been there for 10 years, and I haven't had any security incidents or property, anything to do with property before. And that was just my biggest concern as far as that aspect of it goes. I'm all for progress, and I understand there's a need for more doctors in this area, and I think it's a good thing in a lot of aspects. It's unfortunate it's going where it's going. Other than that, the other question that I had was another concern, not concern, but question that I do have is the access point going to be on Burns Drive, is that where they're accessing the collaborative clinic? And it's gonna be paved?
Mr. Boone?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to Mr. Harnish. My understanding of the main access, and Mr. Parsons can confirm that, will be off Burns Drive. There's no requirement to pave Burns Drive, but that would be a consideration by Nova Scotia Public Works in the future, that if there's enough traffic, that may generate that concern or that question, but that would be something that Nova Scotia Public Works would have to undertake. Municipality doesn't own the road, so it wouldn't be something that we would be paving. We can't make a requirement because we don't own the right-of-way. I anticipate that the site itself will be paved because it'll be a modern facility, so that's the best I can tell, but certainly Mr. Parsons can answer those questions in a little bit more detail, but, yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Parsons. You're fine, right where you're at, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have had some discussions with the province and the local authorities on paving that road. And along ways with it, because this is a relatively new agreement that we have with the province. So it's in the works. It's not complete, but certainly recognize that the road should be paved. We're going to do all we can to see that happens. But with respect to the concerns about the methadone and the users of it, all these communities have collaborative health centers. I live in the community of Middleton. I don't see a lot of people going to the clinic that are, that I would consider a threat to my health and human safety. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. Mental health and substance abuse is the number one problem in this province. We all deal with it one way or another, so it's always a concern. We recognize that, and how we deal with it is responsible matter. I'm not sure that's under our control, but certainly recognize that is a concern.
Thank you very much. Continue on. If there's anything else you'd like to say.
And I have just two other questions. One was just to requesting, if possible, a buffer between, because I'm like literally right beside it, between us and the new clinic. I don't know much about distances. I'm thinking, if possible, 30 meters minimum. I don't know if that's possible, but that's one question I have. And the other one I have is municipal sewer going to be put in for the residents of that area? You know, I mean, is it going to be, or are we going to maintain, I have a septic system, I guess.
Right, yep.
Right,
So
that's-
before we go to those answers with Glenn, as a point of clarification, what would be the current buffer now to add into this conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have had conversations with Mr. Parsons, also as VP of Development, Mr. Hearn, who has been the lead on the application. The discussion is along the vacant lot that's there, which is part of the rezoning and part of the ownership that they would attain. That's an area where they would look to create the buffer. That lot is probably somewhere within excess of about 100 to 106 feet in width. It's all subject to a survey, of course. I think there's an area there that Mr. Parsons can speak to, that we don't have a requirement for a buffer, but our conversations have been maintaining a buffer there. It would be between 75 and 100 feet. 100 feet would be approximately the 30 meters. So that area is fully treed now, and so the advantage of a buffer there, Mr. Chair, and to council and to the other public members, is the buffer's already there, so it exists. So working around that during construction, I think, is something that the developer and the ownership group can speak to, but that's the conversation we've had. Having an established buffer is probably something we would look at in a bit more detail in the plan review. I agree that we should have something a little more solid in there, so that we're working with the developer to put that in place. In respect to municipal services, the only service that we can guarantee that will go to that area is in the negotiations that the town is having with the developer with extension of municipal water, which is something that's permitted and would be something that the town is open to and working with Parsons Investments on getting in place. Right now, there would be no plan for municipal sewer in that area, but that's just where it exists today. So, but I can let Mr. Parsons maybe speak to the buffer a little bit more.
Mr. Parsons, go ahead. Thank you.
Through the chair, but in preliminary discussions, we certainly recognize recognize the need for a buffer, and it shows on our preliminary plan, you know, is it 90 feet or 30 meters or 100 feet? That is a reasonable request, and I think, you know, it's naturally there. We don't want to be on your doorstep, and you don't want us there, so whether it's 30 meters or somewhere in that range, you know, that's a reasonable request. I think we address that in the preliminary design, but you know, we're going to maintain some buffer there, and I think it'll be 100 feet. That's what Director Bill and I talked about. That's the goal. Not sure where the footings will land up, but somewhere in that area.
Thank you. Any more comments?
No
Mr.
further
Ellis?
concerns for me, thank you.
If I may clarify, there is existing, do you have existing town water now at your
I do,
property? Yes. Thought so. I thought it went into your, as far as yours, and I know that's there along the highway, so, but part of that also would be if you extend that water service, that line's not big enough for to go any further than where it is. Am I correct on that too?
I think so.
Yeah, I believe I'm right. So if and when the town water went in, you'd end up with a bigger line probably in front of your house and better water pressure.
Yeah.
Would be a summation at the end of the day, I think, so, anyway. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just back that's why we've connected the developer with the town. There is a bigger line that runs in McDonald, and there's shut-offs at the intersection, as I mentioned earlier. So it will likely that the residential homeowners that are there have smaller lines off that. I have a feeling that the line that goes up Burns will be enhanced, so, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for everything today. Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to speak? Now's your chance. Any additional comments from the applicant?
No, as I always got to have the last word, right? But as I sit here and I think as I drive down to the cul-de-sac and speaking with this neighbor here on some of her concerns, looks like it's an area that might be used for some odd character, not so uses, we'll say. You know, hopefully that will clean that area up some.
Yep.
Continue to do some lighting and activity, so it might, you know, it might be a good thing for that area, is what I feel.
Yeah, good.
It's a nice thing.
Okay. Okay, any additional questions from councilors? Councilor Gold, go ahead.
Yeah, just one, the other lots that are down the bottom of that cul-de-sac are stay in highway commercial. Was there a plan for that, or is there a reason we're not changing it all at one point, or?
Mr. Chair? Back to Councilor Gould. In our conversations with Parsons Investment and with Scott as the lead, is we thought we should know what the plans are before we make zoning changes. The idea was just to rezone what was needed in and around the clinic and the medical practice, a collaborative practice itself. That was the kind of the focus. Long term, I think there are some conversations, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but Mr. Parsons and his group are talking to the owner who has all of the surplus land in there, and it, you know, could be an opportunity for them to acquire. But right now, they're really focused on the medical collaborative practice. So we just wanted to be specific on the site that was at hand with the development that was at hand, as opposed to maybe generating a little too much concern for the neighborhood. Try to do one project, one piece at a time. I would say two things will happen, Mr. Chair, if I can, back to Councillor Gould, is we'll either look at the rest of the zoning in there as part of our overall plan review. That's a much bigger project, as Council's been hearing me say for a while. And the second would be if Parsons Investments acquires all of the remaining lands of the ownership in there, that they may come back with individual projects. But I think their focus is really on this much-needed facility. So, but over time, I think we'll have to look at what's in there and maybe have some considerations about the zoning that, the remaining zoning that may touch some of the residential properties. We could even look at that too. So if that answers the question, Councilor.
Yes, it does, and if I can ask just one more.
Go ahead,
So
Councilor Gould.
it's tied up with the health center there, the hospital, boundary-wise. Is there a plan for, are they connected at all? Will they be working collaboratively together on this project, or working together, sharing services or anything?
Initially, it's a private held development, but leased back to the province. So that's how it's Scott, Mr. Hearn has laid it out to me. The possibility of collaboration, obviously the two are connected. It's going to be rented by public health, so obviously there could be an opportunity. I don't want to speak out of turn, but it's possible there may be some conversations around connection to other services that are on the current hospital site. And I think that's a long term. If there was a connection there, it actually may, over the long term, if that happens, it may take traffic off of Burns if they made that connection. I think the hospital, you know, any expansion that ever happened to the hospital, looking at the site plan, if you do in the package, you know, that's kind of an area where they may have reserved for future expansion if it was ever needed, you know, parking or physical expansion of the hospital. So I always think there's an opportunity. I just don't think it's confirmed at this time.
Yep, appreciate that, thank you.
Well, thank you, Councilor Gould. Thank you, Director Boone. Councilor Joseph, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is for the, for Mr. Part, or the proponent, yes. And listen to the, Mr. Harnish stuff. Is there, I understand there's a development going on, and I may be getting ahead of myself here, but was there any talk of a security plan for this site?
Back to the applicant. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't directly involved in the application. Scott, the Vice President, was put the application together, so I really can't speak to that. And good question, but I don't have a very accurate answer for you.
Mr. Chair, that's understandable, but I think to the public and to the residents, if that was part of the information, I think there'd be like a sense of ease on them, and that's just all I have there. It's a security plan.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Councilor Joseph. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak from council? Seeing none, I'll now declare the public hearing closed. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, calling the meeting back to order. Organizational, Section 9, Organizational Policy and Bylaw Items. 9.1 is second reading of the bylaw to amend the LUB 24-12 and Shaw Rural Housing Development Agreement to rezone multiple PIDs within the bounds of Mechanic, Elm, and Crossan Street, Spring Hill. Director Boone, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to just move from, there was a second presentation, so we're going to the second reading on, we're going to start with Shaw, because we're going to follow the same order, so we're good, Peter, right there. Yep. Awesome, thank you. Thank you again. Thank you, Peter, for manipulating the technology here, because there was a lot on the agenda, as I mentioned before. So, Mr. Chair, second reading presentation. Under the Municipal Government Act, council can consider, after closing public hearings, going to second reading in the same meeting. Still good? There we go. All right. So, thank you, Peter. So with that in mind, we're just going to jump here. It's all right, no worries. Dancing on us. So, Mr. Chair, when I was trying to copy that onto our disk earlier, of course, my computer froze up at the same time. So technology is great, as we say, as long as it works. So
Well, it doesn't freeze.
yeah, no, exactly. So I'm not going to review the whole project again. I think we did a very detailed run through on the at the public hearing. In this case, second reading, there's no presentations from the proponent and no opportunity for folks to speak. So I'll go to the next slide, Peter, please. So a little bit of a review of what we already talked about in the public hearing. It's all very fresh, I hope. Happy to answer any questions once again. But the key in this development, it's I call it essentially 4 parcels. So the parcel that we sold through our open RFP process for land, surplus lands, Shaw has obtained 2 private properties through acquisition they did directly, and as Stephanie mentioned in her presentation, they're working with Nova Scotia Housing on those additional lands, which are a multiple number of PIDs which are in the motion, but also, although they're mapped as separate PIDs, it kind of acts as one kind of chunk or parcel of land, because the road right-of-way that goes through there and the PIDs have never been built or serviced with municipal services. I think we had a lot of conversation around the access points in and out, and about the connection, especially the connection to the lower left in your screen where you can see the pedestrian connection comes off all of those, the heavier nodes of development on the north end that lead into, from the development through the right-of-way to Robertson, existing Robertson Avenue. And again, commitment from Shaw Rural is that they will develop and build that off-site pedestrian connection as part of this overall development. So an off-site improvement because it's not on their land, but part of the development. Next slide, please. I won't go through all the phasing. I think we did that in very good detail in the public hearing, but if there's any other questions on that, happy to come back to them. The initial phase will be off Crossan Street as per the area outlined in yellow. Next slide, please. I think Stephanie did an awesome job reviewing the development. The fact that they've created concepts that are looking directly in from the particular development. This is in from Crossan Street, she mentioned. I think it really gives you a good idea of how things get laid out. And we do have a landscape plan that shows those green spaces that are in front of each of the units, as well as the tree planting. They are on the site plan, which forms part of and is referred to as in the landscaping in the development agreement. So I think that really laid it out a little bit more clear today with the public hearing and now here at the second reading. Next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to speak about the layouts. I think that was done very well during the public hearing, especially the proponent's presentation. A number of different units that will go in there in a number of configurations. So I think we saw some really good concepts of that. Requirements, the key ones, we've talked just because you're going to give second reading consideration to this. The main things, it's going to be phased development, working with our municipal public works. They will coordinate all the service connections and will develop a formalized servicing agreement that will be part of the process. So embedded only in the development agreement in the fact that there will be a service agreement. It's negotiated outside, but it is a requirement to have it in place. Property owners, as we mentioned, do all of those connections for access and connecting all the dwellings, especially through Robertson with the pedestrian pathways we spoke to. Next slide, please. I will not go through all of the changes that I did in detail during the public hearing. I think it's just important to note that we did some tweaking, really words and clarification from what you saw in the initial development agreement. That's not unusual in the process as you get into the more detailed conversations, start working through and making sure things, if a development agreement is approved by council, is easy for our development officers and planners to administer. So a lot more clarification for sure. Again, happy to answer any questions about those changes that I detailed earlier, Mr. Chair. So final slide, I guess, Peter. Again, financial implications, none specific. All the services, as I mentioned earlier, are done, and the internal road networks, pedestrian walkways, and connections are all built as part of the development by Shaw Rural. And the community engagement, I went through that in great detail. I guess the only difference in this is at the point when we wrote this report and got it ready for the package and the presentation, we had not received any comments, but we did have that one letter of support from Nova Scotia Community College. So that would, if we had added that earlier, we would have had that in the presentation. So unless there's questions, Mr. Chair, recommendation is before you and for consideration by council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone. The recommended motion is the council approve second reading of the bylaw to amend the land use bylaw 24-12 to rezone the following parcels, all 15 PIDs. I read them out earlier. I'm not going to do that again. And to approve second reading of the Shaw Rural Housing Development Agreement in Spring Hill. If someone would like to make the motion, Councillor Joseph, and second by Councillor McCormick. Any questions on any of this by any of the council members? Go ahead, Councillor Joseph.
It's not more a question but a comment. When I was growing up, that was the same field I played baseball in. We hung around in. We had a lot of great times, motorcycle, biking. It's great to see this project getting moved forward and addressing the issue of housing within Cumberland County, especially Spring Hill. Thank you, Your Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no other comments or questions from council, I will now call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. 9.2, a second reading of the bylaw to amend the land use bylaw 24-13 to rezone a portion of PIDs 2507, 2455, and 2535, 9803 Burns Drive, Upper Napan. Mr. Boone, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for setting this up. We just went through this in great detail in the public hearing. The one good thing about the planning process is an opportunity for proponents to present, not just to hear from your staff, but also for engagement from the public. So that's a very positive part of the process. Sometimes folks will come and just want to hear what's being said about the development, and other times folks like Mr. Harnish would like to speak. So that's important to note in the process. So I think the process is working where we have those engagements. Some of it happens before the public hearing and some of it happens during. Next slide, Peter, please. So as we noted, we're only looking at a rezoning of a portion of the larger PID, and then the smaller PID, which I mentioned before, is kind of like the buffer between the residential and the commercial area. All of this land that's under the commercial designation is commercial highway now. So as I mentioned earlier, we see it as a bit of a down zoning because there's some more, intensive uses that could happen in a highway commercial zone. So in a way, the rezoning to a commercial general is a little bit of a softer zone. It is still commercial, as I mentioned in the public hearing, but just the less intensive uses are permitted. So to go from highway commercial to the general commercial is what we have proposed and brought forward, but also that one text amendment, that is part of your second reading approval. But as I mentioned earlier, that will help us in all of our general commercial zones, not just this specific rezoning. So I think it's important to clarify medical offices versus just regular office space, because it is clarified in our institutional zones. They do talk about medical offices versus just regular office. So a good thing that this process is helping us articulate and be a little bit more clarified on. Next slide, Peter, please. We talked about the concept in the elevation. Again, earlier, it's a modern facility providing much needed services, so I won't speak a lot on the concepts. From a site plan perspective, again, we talked about the buffer. Mr. Parsons spoke to that. I think the company is very open-minded and very committed to being good neighbors, so I think that's a positive part of the development as it moves forward. Next slide, please. Again, the road is built to DOT standards, fairly well maintained. I think some more activity on the road might help some of the activity that we don't want at the end of the road, and I was glad that folks had a chance to speak their part to Mr. Parsons directly about that. So I think maybe some positives can come through some of the challenges that our neighborhood might have seen at the outset of this project. Next slide, please. Again, this is just a clarification on medical offices within that those permitted uses under the zone. Again, it's a clarification point, but I think it's very important for us to do it at this stage. Next slide, please. So quickly, I talked about the environmental implications, utilization of Amherst Water Utility to service this, and they will be working with Nova Scotia Environment and their designers and getting an on-site sewage disposal system. So I think those things were all self-explanatory during the hearing. And more specifically, how we got here today, open process, made sure we were advertised as per the Municipal Government Act, did that 2 weeks in advance. We also did some signage on the site, try to orient that so the neighborhood could see it, as well as we did go the extra step, which is the advertisement in the locally circulated newspaper, which is a regional paper, but it also has an online presence. We did mention earlier in the presentation, Mr. Harnish got to speak. I know there was some conversation, a lot of good dialogue with the developers, so just want to reinforce that those things that we mentioned in the public hearing and those that spoke, at the time we developed this presentation, we didn't know who would speak or not, so I just wanted to reinforce those folks who are here today to listen in from the neighborhood and also to speak from the neighborhood. So, Mr. Chair, unless there's specific questions, happy to answer them. The recommendation is before you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boone. The recommended motion is that council approve a second reading of bylaw to amend the land use bylaw 24-13 to rezone a portion of PID 2507-2455 and PID 2535-9803 from highway commercial to general commercial and add medical offices as a permitted use as of right in the general commercial zone. Somebody would be like to make that motion? Councilor Gould, seconded, Councilor Redmond, and any discussion from council on this? Go ahead, Councilor Gould.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple things known about that. I've been on that road a couple times, and I want to thank Mr. Harnish for sharing his points, because I think they're very valid. Thank the developer for listening to them and agreeing to that buffer. I think that's very important. I have been called by another resident close by there on a couple occasions about the activity going on at the bottom. I have gone down more than once with a garbage bag and picked up many McDonald's and many garbage down there on my own time, as well as some calls about that road, and with that traffic comes the dust, and working with Adam Cameron to try to get it sprayed in you know, good time of the year when the dust is really high. So there has been some issues there. I think this is a positive project, and I think that this will probably help with some of them other issues. So I thank you for your cooperation and your concerns. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Gould. Anyone else have anything to say? Hearing nothing, I will now call for the vote on it. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. If I could now have a motion to adjourn. The motion is so moved by Councilor Gould. We are now adjourned. Thank you very much, folks.